The storm had teeth. It howled across the red plains of Cathar Prime, turning sand into knives that clawed at the small human outpost. The world had been a graveyard since the orbital war. Charred hulls, ruined towers, and a silence that felt too heavy to breathe in. Lieutenant Mara Vance pulled her scarf tighter around her face as she forced the supply crate open. Come on, she muttered, her fingers trembling from the cold. Only 3 ration packs left. She sighed. Enough for 1 human for maybe 2 days, if she stretched it. Then came the sound, a whimper. Small, fragile. Not human. Mara froze, her hand on her blaster. She scanned the wreckage behind her, the hollow shell of a transport skiff half buried in the ash. The noise came again. She stepped closer. Inside, she found them. 3 small creatures shivering under the broken wing plating, Cathari cubs, furry, silver-skinned, with luminous eyes that flickered like moonlight. Their tiny claws clung to each other as they looked up at her, afraid. Mara's breath caught in her throat. She'd seen their kind before, their grown kind. Cathari were the apex predators of this world. They'd hunted humans during the war. They were the reason her entire platoon was gone. But these cubs weren't soldiers. They were starving. The smallest one whimpered again, weakly. Mara hesitated, staring at her remaining rations. 3 packs, 3 cubs, 1 human. She knelt slowly, opening a pack. Don't bite me, all right? She whispered, tearing the seal and placing a piece of nutrient bar on the ground. The cub sniffed it, then devoured it. The other 2 followed, crying softly as they ate. Mara smiled faintly, her heart twisting. Guess we're all just trying to survive, huh? She stayed there as the storm raged on, shielding them with her coat. She fed them everything, every crumb she had left. When the winds finally died, the cubs were asleep in her lap, tiny chests rising and falling in sync with her breath. And for the first time since her ship had gone down, she didn't feel alone. When dawn came, she heard the roar, low, deep, terrifying. The cubs woke instantly, ears twitching, bodies trembling. A shadow moved across the dunes, massive, muscular, walking on 2 legs. Mara stood, heart pounding. She recognized him instantly. A Cathari Alpha. He was enormous, almost 3 meters tall, his fur streaked with scars and his armor scorched from battle. His eyes, those same luminous silver eyes, locked onto hers, then onto the cubs at her feet. Mara raised her hands. Easy. They were starving, she said, voice trembling. I just fed them, that's all. The Alpha bared his teeth, a guttural growl rumbling from deep within. The ground almost seemed to vibrate with it. He took a step forward. The cubs squeaked and rushed to him, curling around his legs. He sniffed them, then turned his gaze back to Mara. For a moment she thought he'd kill her. But instead, he knelt. The alien warrior lowered himself, his eyes locked with hers. He said something in his own tongue, harsh syllables she didn't understand, but his tone wasn't rage. It was shock and gratitude. He touched his chest, then hers, then his again. Mara swallowed hard. You're welcome? The Alpha growled softly, almost like a sigh, and then motioned for her to follow. Mara looked at the endless desert behind her, then at him. Her rations were gone. Her beacon was dead. And yet somehow in this alien wilderness she wasn't afraid anymore. She nodded once and stepped forward. The Alpha turned and led the way. The cubs followed him, and she followed them. None of them knew then that this small act, one woman's choice to share her food, would shake the future of 2 species. The desert stretched like a red ocean beneath a sky of cold fire. Mara followed the towering figure of the Cathari Alpha, every step sinking into sand that hissed beneath her boots. He hadn't spoken again, but she could feel his awareness of her, like a weight pressing against her thoughts. The cubs bounded between them, occasionally glancing back at her as if making sure she was still there. The sun was rising, white-hot and cruel. After hours of walking, her legs trembled. She stumbled once, just a little, and instantly, the Alpha turned. His reflexes were terrifyingly fast. He caught her before she hit the sand. Mara froze. His massive clawed hand, scarred and plated with armor, was gentle as it steadied her. She stared up into those alien silver eyes and saw something strange there. Not hatred, not hunger, but concern. "I'm fine," she breathed, even though her throat was sandpaper. He grunted low and disbelieving, then reached for the pack slung across his back. From it, he pulled something, a curved bone flask, wrapped in hide. He handed it to her. She hesitated. "You're giving me water?" The Alpha tilted his head slightly, then made a growling sound that might have been a yes, or an order. Mara took a sip. The water was warm and tasted faintly metallic, but to her it felt like life itself. "Thank you," she whispered. He made another sound, softer this time. The cubs yipped in approval, circling her boots. By nightfall, they reached what looked like a camp. Jagged rocks formed a natural wall around a hollow, where tents made of leather and bone stood under flickering fires. Other Cathari moved there, warriors with glowing eyes, their voices deep and rough like thunder. When they saw her, they froze. Every spear turned her way. Mara's breath hitched. She wanted to explain, wanted to say she meant no harm, but the Alpha raised one hand and roared something in his language. Instant silence. Every head bowed. The Alpha motioned toward her again, his voice slower this time. She couldn't understand the words, but the tone carried weight. A declaration. The other Cathari looked stunned. One of them barked something, angry, pointing at her rifle. The Alpha's growl drowned him out. It was the sound of authority, the kind that came from strength earned in battle and blood. And suddenly, no one argued again. He turned back to her and gestured toward a tent near the fire. Mara hesitated. "You want me to stay?" He nodded once. She stepped inside, her heart pounding. The cubs followed her in and curled at her feet before she could protest. She sank to her knees, stroking one of their soft heads. "You got me into this, you little furballs," she whispered, smiling weakly. "I hope your dad doesn't regret it." Outside, she could hear the Alpha speaking in low tones to the others. The camp seemed uneasy. She caught one phrase repeated several times, something like "Vatar," always said after glances in her direction. Later that night, the Alpha entered the tent. He ducked low under the frame, carrying a carved stone bowl of glowing blue stew. He set it in front of her. Mara blinked. "You cooked?" He gave a rumbling exhale, almost like amusement. She took a cautious bite. It was smoky and spicy, but edible. "It's good," she said softly. "Thank you." He studied her face for a moment. Then, very slowly, he touched his chest again. "Rakur," he said. She realized it was his name. "Mara," she replied, pointing to herself. His brow furrowed slightly, then he repeated, "Mara." It wasn't perfect, but the way he said it carried weight. He tapped his chest again. "Rakur." Then hers. "Mahra." For a strange heartbeat, they just looked at each other, the fire painting both of them in warm gold. The cubs chirped in their sleep, and Rakur's gaze softened. Mara didn't know the customs of this world. She didn't understand their language or their history. But that night, sitting across from the Alpha who should have hated her, she realized something that made her chest ache. He didn't see her as prey. He saw her as owed, and among the Kethari, a debt of life was sacred. Mara woke to the sound of growling outside the tent. She sat up fast, her pulse thudding in her ears. The cubs were already awake, whining softly, their fur standing on end. Outside, two deep voices clashed, Cathari warriors arguing. She slipped out of the tent flap and froze. Rakur stood in the middle of the camp, towering over two soldiers with bared fangs. His voice was thunder, his claws glinting in the morning light. The others watched in tense silence, their spears tight in hand. One of the warriors shouted something and jabbed a claw toward Mara. The meaning was clear enough. They didn't want her here. Mara stepped back, but before she could retreat, Rakur roared. It wasn't just a sound, it was a force. The air trembled. Every Cathari instantly dropped their gaze. Rakur's silver eyes burned as he pointed toward her, then struck his chest with a clenched fist. The words came low and certain. Mahra. Vatar. The crowd muttered the same phrase. Vatar. She'd heard it before. The tone wasn't angry anymore. It was reverent. When the confrontation ended, Rakur turned toward her. His expression was unreadable, but he motioned for her to follow him again. She hesitated. You could have. Just let me leave, she whispered. He shook his head once, slow and firm. No. That one word, clearly spoken, thick with his accent, made her blink. He'd learned it. For her. They walked beyond the camp to a ridge of black stone where the wind carried the scent of ash and salt. Below lay the wreckage of an ancient ship half swallowed by dunes, an alien war relic. Mara knelt beside it, running her hand over the melted hull. You fought here, she murmured. Rakur stood behind her, silent, then nodded. War, dead. She looked back at him. Your people lost. He hesitated before answering. All lost. His voice cracked like the word itself was a wound. The cubs came bounding after them, chasing dust and laughter. Rakur's gaze softened as they climbed onto his legs. For a moment, the terrifying alpha looked like something else. A father. Mara smiled faintly. They're lucky to have you. He tilted his head, curious. Lucky? It means safe, she said, pressing a hand over her chest. Protected. He stared at her hand for a long time, then mimicked the gesture. Protected. Something inside her ached at the word. Days turned into a rhythm. The Cathari camp began to tolerate her presence. Barely. The cubs adored her, often climbing into her lap or hiding behind her when Rakur barked commands. Some warriors sneered at that. Others avoided her like she carried a curse, but Rakur never left her side. He taught her to recognize their hand signals, their hunting gestures, even their drinking rituals. When she fell behind on the long walks, he slowed down without a word. He was still a predator. She never forgot that, but there was something more underneath the scars and the power, something painfully human. One night, while tending the fire, Mara found a shard of glass from her old communicator. She tried again to repair it, whispering to herself, If I can just boost the signal. Rakur's shadow fell across her. He crouched beside her, watching. Use call Sky? She nodded. Home. His expression changed, tension flickered through his jaw. Home? Not here. No, she said softly. Not here. He was quiet for a long moment. The cubs were asleep between them, and the flames painted his face in soft golden shadow. Finally, he said, If you go, no return. Her heart sank. What do you mean? He looked at her and in that low, rumbling voice said words she didn't expect him to know. Humans kill Cathari. Cathari kill humans. You stay safe, you go. Or, Mara swallowed hard. She wanted to argue, but she couldn't. Because he was right. She stared at the sky, thinking of her destroyed ship, her lost crew, her silent beacon. Maybe Earth had already written her off as dead. Rakur shifted closer, lowering his massive frame beside her. His voice was soft now. You? Safe with Rakur. And the way he said it, slow, steady, protective, broke through the loneliness that had haunted her since the crash. She looked up at him and smiled faintly. I believe you. The alpha exhaled almost a sigh. His hand brushed the sand between them, and for the first time, it felt less like two enemies sharing ground, and more like two survivors learning what peace meant. But peace was fragile on Cathar Prime, and soon, it would shatter. The night was calm, too calm. The desert wind had gone still, and even the cubs slept without their usual soft whimpers. Mara sat near the fire, polishing the old shard of her communicator, watching its faint flicker. It was useless. The frequency was dead. Then for the first time in weeks, a ping. She froze. The shard glowed faintly blue. A signal, weak, but real. Her breath caught. Oh my God, she whispered, tapping the edge. It's Earth, it's someone. The static broke into words. Rescue team. Responding to beacon, identify coordinates. Her heart thundered. She scrambled for her notepad. scribbling numbers from memory. But before she could reply, a deep growl cut through the night. Rakur stood behind her, eyes glowing like silver blades. He looked from the flickering shard to her trembling hands. "Who?" he demanded. "Humans," she said, voice shaking. "They found me, Rakur. I can go home." The words hit the air like a weapon. Rakur's face tightened, his jaw hard. The cubs stirred in their sleep as the alpha's growl deepened. "No. What do you mean, no?" she snapped, standing. "They can save me. You don't understand. I can't live here forever." He stepped forward, the fire painting his armor in gold and red. "Human come," he said slowly, forcing the words. "They bring death. They're my people," she argued. "They won't hurt you if I explain." Rakur's hand slammed down, scattering sparks. "They kill cubs." The word struck her like a slap. She saw it in his eyes then. Memory. Flames reflected in them. Cities burning. The screams of both species caught in a loop of hate. He wasn't wrong. The war between humans and Kethari had been brutal. Both sides had done things that shouldn't be remembered. But this was her chance to go home. She swallowed hard. "I can't stay here forever," she said softly. "You know that." Rakur's gaze dropped to the cubs asleep by the fire. His chest rose and fell with a tremor. When he looked back at her, his voice had gone quiet, almost human. "You are?" "Pack, it broke something in her. Rakur," she whispered, reaching out, but he stepped back. "You leave," he said, turning away. "I protect. From humans. From all—" "Protect who?" she asked, tears stinging her eyes. "Me or yourself?" He didn't answer. By dawn, the rescue signal grew stronger. Mara climbed the ridge, her makeshift transmitter clutched tight. She could see the faint outline of a ship in the sky, a silver drop breaking through clouds. The moment she raised the beacon high, she heard it again, that roar. Rakur burst through the dust, fury in his eyes. "No," Mara shook her head. "It's done. They're coming." The cubs clung to his legs, crying softly. The rest of the Kethari warriors appeared behind him, armed and tense. She turned toward him one last time. "I can tell them you helped me. I can save you." Rakur stared at her for a long, broken second. Then he stepped forward and pressed his forehead to hers, a gesture she'd come to recognize. "It was their wordless promise, Mara," he said softly. "You already did." Then he shoved her backward, hard. She fell behind a dune just as the sky exploded. The rescue ship screamed down through the clouds, engines roaring, guns charged. Bolts of plasma scorched the desert where she'd stood seconds before. Kethari warriors scattered, howling. Mara crawled up, screaming into the comm. "Cease fire!" Friendly, stop. But it was chaos. Through the storm of dust and light, she saw Rakur, charging toward the landing site. His roar cut through the fire. Not to attack, but to shield the cubs behind him. The humans didn't see that. They only saw the monster. A shell hit the ground near him, tearing through the sand. He stumbled, blood flashing against the light. "No!" Mara screamed, sprinting toward him. She grabbed her transmitter, waving frantically. "Hold fire, damn it." "He's with me." The signal crackled. "Lieutenant Vance? We have visual. Hold position." Too late, Rakur dropped to one knee, shielding the smallest cub with his arm. Plasma fire hissed past him, lighting his armor like molten glass. And still, he didn't move, didn't strike, didn't roar again. He only looked at her, through the dust, through the chaos, and gave the smallest nod. The look said everything. "Stay alive. That's my debt." Smoke and dust filled the air. The sky that had once promised rescue now burned like war all over again. Mara stumbled through the wreckage, coughing, her ears ringing from the concussive blasts. "Rakur," she screamed, her voice cracking. "Rakur, answer me." No reply, only the crackle of fires and the hiss of cooling metal. The rescue shuttle's landing ramp lowered ahead, its floodlights slicing through the storm. Human soldiers rushed out, rifles raised, scanning for hostiles. When they saw her, one of them shouted, "Lieutenant Vance, we've got her! Get her aboard!" Two medics ran to her, grabbing her arms. But Mara jerked away, wild-eyed. "No! There are survivors, Kethari, cubs, they're not enemies." The commander, a broad man in gray armor, stared at her like she'd gone mad. "Kethari? Lieutenant? Those things wiped out entire outposts. You're lucky to be alive." She shook her head fiercely. "You don't understand. They saved me." "He saved me. He?" The commander repeated, incredulous. You've been out here too long. Mara looked past him into the swirling dust. A silhouette moved there, a massive form limping through smoke carrying two cubs clutched close to his chest. Rocker. Her heart clenched. There, hold your fire. But the soldiers didn't see him as a savior. They saw a monster. Contact! Hostile incoming. One yelled, raising his weapon. Mara threw herself in front of the line. Don't! He's not. A blast went off anyway. Blue plasma seared the air. Rakur staggered but didn't fall. He placed the cubs gently on the sand and raised his hands, palms open. The soldiers hesitated. Mara ran toward him, ignoring their shouts. She reached him as he dropped to one knee, breathing raggedly. His armor was scorched, his side bleeding dark silver. Rakur, she whispered, tears spilling. Why didn't you run? He looked at her, eyes soft despite the pain. Run? From you? The simplicity of it shattered her. She pressed her hands against his wound. Stay still. We can treat this, please. He touched her wrist, his hand trembling. No, humans not. Want peace, she shook her head desperately. They'll listen to me. I'll make them. He gave the faintest smile, a strange, almost tender curve of fanged lips. Mara, always try. Then his gaze drifted to the cubs. One of them whimpered and crawled into her lap, tiny claws clutching her sleeve. Rakur's breathing slowed. His eyes closed for a moment, and when they opened again, there was resolve. He reached to his neck and tore off a small metallic crest, a pendant made from the tooth of some ancient beast. He pressed it into her hand. Keep them safe. Rakur, no, she whispered, shaking. You're going to be fine. He didn't answer. Instead, he rose, towering even as he bled, and turned toward the human soldiers who had taken up formation again. His claws flexed, but not in aggression. He spread his arms wide, exposing his chest as if to make them stop. Rakur, she screamed. The commander gave the order before she could move. Fire! The next blast hit him square in the chest. The world slowed. He fell to one knee again, the ground shaking beneath him. The cubs cried out. Mara screamed until her throat broke. The soldiers advanced, rifles still hot. She ran to him, clutching his body, shielding him with her own. Stop. He saved me, she sobbed. He saved me. The commander hesitated then, seeing the cubs clinging to her side. His voice dropped. What in hell? One of the medics stepped forward slowly, scanning Rakur's still form. He's alive, barely. Mara looked up, wild hope flashing through her tears. Then help him. The commander frowned. We can't bring that thing aboard. If he dies, I stay, she said, her voice steady now. Silence fell. The desert wind returned, whispering around the fires. Finally, the commander exhaled. Fine, but if it moves wrong, I'll put it down myself. Mara didn't care. She pressed her forehead against Rakur's and whispered, You're not dying on me. Not after everything. As the medics lifted his massive form onto a stretcher, the cubs followed, mewling softly. Mara held the pendant tight in her palm, the last warmth of his hand still on it. For the first time since the crash, she wasn't sure if rescue had come to save her, or to take away the only peace she'd found. The human rescue ship Horizon rose through the choking air of Cathar Prime, its engines turning the sands below into a storm of fire. Inside, everything was steel and silence. Mara sat on the medbay floor beside a reinforced stasis capsule, her knees pulled to her chest. The hum of machinery was steady, the only sign that Rakur was still alive. The medics hadn't been kind. They'd kept him sedated, restrained, and sealed away like a dangerous animal. His wounds were deep. One plasma shot had nearly torn through his lung, but his body refused to give up. He clung to life the same way he'd stood against the fire. Stubbornly, defiantly. The two cubs were locked in a side compartment, trembling inside a glass enclosure meant for non-human samples. Mara's hands shook with fury. She stood and faced the guards outside. They're children, not specimens. The commander didn't flinch. Lieutenant, you've been through trauma. The Cathari slaughtered thousands. They are not our allies. You didn't see him, she snapped. He took plasma fire to protect them, to protect me. The commander folded his arms. And now he's in chains because you brought a war criminal aboard my ship. Her throat tightened. He's not a criminal. He's a father. The commander's expression hardened. He's a liability. And the High Council won't see it your way when we return. They'll study him, dissect his kind if they have to. Mara's voice dropped. Not while I'm breathing. He stared at her for a long moment, then sighed. You've changed out there, Lieutenant. Maybe too much. He turned and left, leaving her alone with the cold hum of the engines. Hours passed. The stars outside stretched like silver threads. Mara sat beside Rakur's capsule, tracing her fingers over the glass. You can't hear me, she whispered, but they don't understand. They never will. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the pendant he'd given her, the tooth crest that marked his tribe. It glowed faintly under the sterile light. She pressed it against the glass. I'll protect them. I swear. A low beep echoed. The stasis monitor flickered, then dimmed. She frowned. What? A shadow moved behind her. Rocker's eyes snapped open. Silver light filled the capsule. The restraint strained as his chest heaved, claws flexing. The machinery around him began to shake under his strength. Mara's heart raced. Wait, stop. You're safe. You're safe. He didn't attack. He looked confused, hurt. But when his gaze found her, something eased. Mara, he rasped. The glass cracked slightly. She stepped forward, hand flat against the barrier. It's me. You're on a ship. My ship. He tilted his head, breathing raggedly. You took me? I couldn't leave you. He exhaled slowly, the sound halfway between disbelief and relief. Cubs? They're alive, she said quickly. They're scared but alive. He nodded weakly, his head resting against the stasis glass. Then, debt lives, her eyes stung. Rakur, you don't owe me anything. He met her gaze and spoke in broken, halting human words. Cathario, life to heart that shares food. Before she could answer, the door behind them slid open. Step away from the containment unit, Lieutenant, the commander ordered. Soldiers stood behind him with rifles ready. Mara raised her hands. He's not resisting. He's just awake. That thing broke protocol the second it breathed, the commander snapped. We're not taking it back alive. Step aside, her pulse spiked. You'll have to shoot through me. The soldiers hesitated. The commander's jaw tightened. Mara, don't do this, but she didn't move. Behind her, Rakur stirred again. The glow from his eyes softened. He placed a clawed hand on the glass, mirroring hers on the other side. His voice was quiet. Go. Safe. No, she whispered, her tears falling freely. Not without you. Then the ship lurched, alarms blaring. An explosion ripped through the hull. The entire deck shook. The commander shouted orders as lights dimmed and klaxons screamed. Mara fell against the capsule as the stasis lock disengaged with a hiss. Rakur's restraints shattered. He stepped out, bleeding, staggering, but alive. The soldiers raised their weapons instinctively. He didn't roar this time. He didn't strike. He simply looked at Mara and lifted one hand toward her face. Mara, run, but she shook her head. No more running. Outside the viewport, she saw it, the dark shape of another ship closing fast. Not human, not friendly. Cathari markings, and they were coming for him. The horizon trembled under the roar of impact. The stars outside vanished, replaced by flashes of red alarms and drifting debris. Cathari vessel approaching fast, shouted the navigator. They're hailing us, multiple signatures armed and closing. Mara stumbled to her feet as the deck pitched sideways. The commander's voice cut through the chaos. All hands to defense. Prepare counterfire, no, she shouted, pushing through the soldiers. They're not here to attack, you attacked them. They're coming for Rakur. The commander turned, eyes blazing. Exactly, and we'll make sure they don't get him. Behind her, Rakur stood tall despite the wounds, his breath ragged but his presence commanding. Even half dead, the room bowed beneath his aura. He looked at the viewport, the Cathari ships growing larger, and murmured, My people come. Mara placed a hand on his arm. They think we've taken you prisoner. We have to stop this before it turns into another war. Rakur turned his gaze to her, silver eyes steady. Too late. Humans never listen. Then make them listen, she pleaded. Show them what you showed me. For a long moment he just looked at her. Then he nodded, slow and certain. He took a deep breath and turned toward the commander. No fight, he said, his broken voice echoing across the deck. I end this. The commander raised his weapon. You're not going anywhere, beast. Rakur took a step forward. Then kill me, he said quietly. And war never end. Mara's voice cracked. Please, just listen to him. The commander hesitated. For the first time, doubt flickered in his eyes. Why would he? Before he could finish, the horizon shook again. A boarding alarm blared. Metal screeched as an alien docking arm pierced the hull. Cathari warriors poured through in a rush of claws and energy blades. Roaring, the soldiers opened fire. Mara screamed as chaos erupted. Plasma, smoke, shouts. Riker roared once, not in rage but command. The sound froze both sides for a heartbeat. The other Cathari turned toward him, recognition flashing through their eyes. Their alpha was alive. Stop, Mara cried, waving her arms. He's not your enemy. None of us have to be. The Cathari leader, a tall female with armor black as obsidian, snarled. Humans took our alpha, you burn in your sky fire. Mara's chest heaved. Look at him, she yelled, pointing to Rucker. He's not chained. He's here by choice. The female looked uncertain. Her eyes darted to Rucker. He raised one hand, speaking in his native tongue, low, resonant, filled with authority and pain. The room went still. Even the ship seemed to hold its breath. When he finished, the female's blade lowered. She stepped back, bowing her head. Rucker turned back to Mara. You see? He said softly. Alpha protect always. She swallowed hard, tears in her eyes. You don't have to stay here. You can go with them. You can go home. He looked at her for a long, silent moment. Then his massive hand reached out, brushing her cheek gently. Home, it's not place. It is who shares food. Her throat closed. Rucker, the commander shouted. Lieutenant, step back. He's boarding with them. He's an enemy. Mara shook her head. No, he's the reason we're still alive. The Cathari warriors began to retreat toward their ship carrying the cubs. Rucker lingered last, his eyes fixed on her. Mahra, he said softly, voice rough. You showed heart in World of Blades. Cathari, remember. She stepped forward, clutching his pendant tight. Will I ever see you again? He smiled faintly, a rare, almost human expression. Skywide. Paths cross. Then, without another word, he turned and leapt through the breach, vanishing into the smoky red light of his ship. Hours later, the battlefield was gone. The horizon drifted through silence once more. Mara sat alone in the observation bay, watching the planet fade into shadow below. The commander approached quietly. Council's going to want your report, he said. She nodded absently. They won't believe it, he hesitated. Do you? She smiled faintly, eyes glistening. I lived it. When he left, she opened her palm. The tooth pendant still glowed faintly. She turned it over in her hand, remembering his last words. Home is not a place, she whispered. It's who shares food. Outside the window, something flickered in the dark. A Cathari vessel, distant but watching. For a moment, she thought she saw a flash of silver eyes through the glass. Then it was gone. Mara pressed her hand to the window, her heart heavy but full. Maybe the war wasn't over, but one human and one alien had already won something greater. They had learned to see each other.